Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari
Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Gaur Bhakti Vrinda Jai Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopila Shyama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Ki Jai Navadurgam Ki Jai Jai Jumana Swasti Bhakti Devi Ki Jai and the Kuki Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Samaveta Bhakti Vrinda Ki Jai Go Predanandi All glories to Samadhi All glories to Samadhi All glories to Samadhi All glories to Sri Guruji All glories to Sri Guruji Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Vishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Prachadane Nirvishesha Shunyavani Pasatadesha Talane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 5, chapter 5, verse 49. Yavad balem teja haramakale Yatavayam chandam adamayatra Yatobayesham ta ime loka Balim haran onam adantyanuha Yavat, as it may be, Yata, as much as, Ubaye Sham, both for you and for us, Te, all, Ime, these, certainly, loka, living entities, balim, offerings, haranta, wild offering, annam, grains, adanti, eat, anuha, without disturbance. Translation: O unborn one, please enlighten us regarding the ways and means by which we can offer you all enjoyable grains and commodities, so that both we and all other living entities in this world, if they want to eat like ordinary animals who have no God consciousness, then they must live in starvation, poverty, and want, like the jungle animals in the forest. The jungle animals are also maintained by the Lord with their respective foodstuffs, but they are not advanced in God consciousness. Similarly, human beings are provided with food, grains, vegetables, fruits, and milk by the grace of the Lord. And it is the duty of human beings to acknowledge the mercy of the Lord. As a matter of gratitude, they should feel obliged to the Lord for their supply of foodstuff, and they must first offer him food in sacrifice and then partake of the remnants. In Bhagavad Gita, it is confirmed that one who takes foodstuff after a performance of sacrifice eats real food for proper maintenance of the body, and so the one who cooks for himself and does not perform any sacrifice eats only lumps of sin in the shape of foodstuffs. Such sinful eating can never make one happy or free from scarcity. Famine is not due to an increase in population, as less intelligent economists think. When human society is grateful to the Lord for all his gifts for the maintenance of the living entities, then there is certainly no scarcity or want in society. But when men are unaware of the intrinsic value of such gifts from the Lord, surely they are in want. A person who has no God consciousness may live in opulence for the time being due to his past virtuous acts. But if one forgets his relationship with the Lord, certainly he must await the stage of starvation by the law of the powerful material nature, and cannot escape the vigilance of the powerful material nature unless he leads a God conscious or devotional life. So here we have a verse all about food, uh, which is not so common, but we see in Bhagavad Gita also uh, in the third chapter. Krishna explains how if you do not do an offering or a yajna to the Supreme Lord when you get your food, then you're eating only sin. And of course, the result of sin is suffering. Uh, so in the purport here, the Prabhupada describes how people are talking about overpopulation and lack of food or lack of water, etc., that's taking place in the material world. And they can also calculate the gradual increase of population. So statistically, it doesn't seem logical that the Earth can support everybody as the population of the humans keep growing and they keep chopping down more trees and trying to get more land to grow things, etc. And meanwhile, the water is getting contaminated and whatever. So it's a big concern that we're overpopulated, etc. Of course, statistically, it makes sense that the more people we have, the more land we need. But ultimately, there is less land and less land, so it's impossible that we can support forever, infinitely increasing our population. But in any case, we do have to look at the whole cause. What is the cause of the shortage? What is the cause of the overpopulation? We have to look at all the different causes involved in this, and it's very difficult. We won't come to a proper conclusion, and even scientists, they argue over, is there climatic change or not climatic change, etc. They have all sorts of theories about this. Is it due to the human beings or not? But of course, if we look even materially at the past, there have been many changes, and it wasn't due to overpopulation. So they had an ice age; everything got covered with ice. They had floods; it wasn't due to overpopulation. In fact, we can say that maybe 10,000 years ago or something, it was very little population everywhere. And then suddenly, maybe 5,000 years ago, they started getting groups where they had
actual cities of, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 people. Well, not that, 5,000 years ago or so. So it didn't look very overpopulated, but nevertheless, we do get food shortages, etc. We see whole civilizations suddenly disappear. And I think mainly it's because they didn't have any food. They had to move out of there and go somewhere else because no food. So it's not just overpopulation that's creating the problem, but we'll see not only in the Vedic life and in the Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam do we get such injunctions. Around the world, we'll find the same thing, that we have to give proper respect for the earth and the food that comes from the earth. And behind that, who gives ultimately the food and the earth to us? We have to give proper respect. And you'll see that in all cultures of the world. So they'll make offerings of some sort. And we'll see all these ancient civilizations had huge temples. And what are they doing? They're offering something in the temples. So it's not this. We could say it's a natural tendency of the human being to do so, also. But we'll find in the Vedic literature, this whole idea of offering is in detail outlined very accurately in different ways. For instance, okay, you could offer to the demigods because Indra supplying the rain, and Surya Dev supplying the sunlight, and whatever. Varuna supplying the water, so you worship demigods like that. So that's one level, and that's permitted by the Vedas also. Worship the demigods, and you get all of your needs fulfilled. Krishna himself recommends that to Arjuna in the 3rd chapter. You worship the devatas, and you live very happy in this material life. But then we see that also above that we have another level of worship. So it's not the level of worshiping demigods, but who's in control of all the demigods. That person we should worship, which is also logical. So this is also presented in Bhagavad Gita. And of course, Krishna recommends this rather than worshiping devatas, because just the results of worshiping devatas is temporary. The devatas are also temporary. But the Supreme Lord is eternal. And when we worship the Supreme Lord, we get much more than simply getting our food and our water. We get eternal life. So we got 2 levels of worship going on here. And probably we'll see that most societies probably are on the lower level, worship some deity to get the food, survive. And when we get to the higher level, then okay, worship the Lord because we want to have eternal life. So this is higher concept. And that is presented, of course, in the Gyan Kanda of the Vedas, whereas the Karma Kanda encourages us to worship devatas for material necessities. Nevertheless, the Vedas recognize both levels. We can't just say, I'm going to renounce everything and be a pure devotee and simply worship the Lord, because we do have a material body. And in order to do our worship, we have to continue to maintain the body. So therefore, the Vedas accept both levels. Yes, in order to support our body, okay, we'll have this whole Karmakanda section, and then we'll have the other section to get out of the material body. So both are accepted. However, there's also a contradiction there, because if you get devoted to devatas, it's material, and ultimately we should be devoted to the Supreme Lord. So how do we make these 2 things coexist? So we'll see in Bhagavatam and in Bhagavad Gita, finally Krishna rejects that lower system. Yes, people can do it. Those are the people of less intelligence. These are the fools. They will worship the devatas for their food and get Svargaloka, and they return to their material bodies again. Those who are more intelligent, then they will worship the Supreme Lord for eternal life. But then how do we get our food as devotees? And the answer to that is, if we worship the Supreme Lord, automatically whatever happens by worshiping devatas also happens. So the example is given in the Bhagavatam that if you water the root of the tree, then the leaves are satisfied. So if you worship the Supreme Lord, all the devatas are satisfied. And that means they will also supply whatever material things you need. So if you worship the Supreme Lord, not only spiritually you advance, but also your material needs are taken care of. So therefore, Krishna says, just worship me and forget about worshiping anybody else. That doesn't mean that we neglect anything, but by worship of Krishna, everything else is supply. However, we also have another thing. We worship the Supreme Lord, but we're not supposed to ask for anything. So we can't, okay, give me some money because I have to eat. So I worship you, Krishna. So that becomes impure bhakti, or mixing bhakti with our material desires. So therefore, the person practicing pure bhakti, by which we get prema, then he must not ask for anything. But even if he doesn't ask, the Lord supplies. So this is what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita: I preserve what you have and I supply what you lack. And you don't have to ask for that. Krishna does that. Supreme Lord does that. So without asking, then the Lord supplies and whatever we need. Now, what do we need? So if we take to devotional service and we become advanced, then our needs automatically reduce. We don't need so much anymore. We become more detached from everything in the material world. So therefore, in our worship of the Lord, then the Lord makes some arrangement. But it's not that the Lord gives everything to everybody. He gives what you need for your devotional advancement. However, at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna also says, well, not Krishna, but Sanjaya says that wherever there's Krishna and Arjuna, then there is all wealth. There's all prosperity, there's all righteousness, all everything. You get everything. So that's also true. So we'll see nice examples of that. The great devotees of the Lord, like Yudhisthira and Arjuna and Ambarish, they were very great devotees, but the Lord gave them everything. They were ruling the whole world. So it's not that he just gives you the very minimum so you can survive, but he will also, in other cases, give everything to that devotee. So according to the Lord's will, he will give a certain amount to different types of devotees according to the role they're playing. In any case, the Lord takes care of his devotees. So when we take to devotional service, then we still have to eat food and drink water, breathe air, etc. And to do that, then we do have to interfere with other living entities. So we don't take animal food, but we do take plant food. So sooner or later we have to kill a plant, and then we commit sin because of that, or violence. So, but the Lord also says you're exempt if it's in the useful for devotional service or whatever. However, we are also likely to misuse that. So I'm a devotee, therefore I can just, take everything and eat everything. But we also overeat, whatever, even if it's vegetarian. So therefore, we have rules also for eating for the devotee. So again, the idea of offering is there. Not offering to Devatas, but offering to that Supreme Lord, but without asking for anything, but just to please the Lord. So, as Prabhupada mentions in the purport, the purpose of this offering is express our gratitude to the Supreme Lord. We have to feel we are always indebted to the Lord for whatever He gives us. So that's an important part of course, even in the material world, people will also emphasize that we have to show gratitude and forgiveness and tolerance and so many things like that. But spiritually also, these qualities also are very, very important. So in the previous verse it said, okay, we have to recognize ourselves as the servant of the Lord. And so the Lord is supreme, we are dependent. So then the Lord has to take care of the servant. But nevertheless, the servant has to feel gratitude for whatever the master gives him. So that is inherent in the process of bhakti. In the material world, of course, the servant may not be so inclined to show gratitude. It's just because you bought me for so much money and I'm just your slave, so why should gratitude to you? But In this case, it's not that it's based upon devotion. We recognize ourselves as the servant of the Lord, and the Lord willingly accepts us and ultimately becomes the servant of the devotee. So there's a relationship of love involved there. So it's a little bit different from the material obligation. So therefore, whenever the Lord does something, the devotee feels the great mercy that the Lord is giving, and therefore he feels this gratitude. So as I said, this is inherent in the nature of bhakti because we do accept that we're the servant of the Lord, and we feel grateful for everything that he gives us. Uh, the In the Shikshashtrika, we have the third verse that we should be humble than a blade of grass, more tolerant than a tree, and give respect to all others, and not crave respect for ourselves. So these are these are core principles that are inherent in bhakti itself. And if we do bhakti but we don't have those principles, then it's not real bhakti. Something is taken out of the bhakti. So along with that, then with the humility and the tolerance and the respect for all living entities, we also have the sense of gratitude to the Supreme Lord. It's inherent in the process of bhakti. We always have great respect and consideration for the Lord and whatever he does. So we express that through offering to the Supreme Lord. In Bhagavad Gita, this is called yagya, which we usually think of as offering things into the fire. And that was one procedure that they followed in Vedic life. They offer things into the fire. But the word yagya comes from the root yaj, and yaj means to worship. So it can be any form of worship, any form of offering to the Lord. So therefore, when Krishna says you must offer yagya to me as part of the system of maintaining your life. So we have to make some sort of offering to the Lord. And this becomes, say, practically implemented within the Vaishnava culture by offering to the deities. So we actually have deities of Krishna, and then we make offerings to him. So in this way, it becomes very concrete. It's not just some abstract offering or even offering into fire. It's actually offering to the Supreme Lord, the deity of the Lord. And then there are procedures for that offering also. You can offer certain foods. You cannot offer other foods. And then there's a procedure for doing the offering. There's procedures for preparing the offering. Rules of cleanliness, rules of punctuality, use of mantras, etc. So this constitutes the pancharatric system of worship of the deity. So we have to offer according to those rules, which are there to discipline us. If you're very advanced devotees, you may not follow all those rules. Because Krishna accepts the devotion, he doesn't care about everything else. But if we're less advanced, then we tend to get sloppy, and our devotion is much less. So therefore, in order to restrict our, you could say, speculative tendencies on how to worship whatever, because we have less bhakti, therefore we have all these rules. So that's the mode of activity. But we do find, for instance, I think it was Vamsidas Babaji, or was there Gorkishore Das Babaji, any one of the Babajis there, where they had their own little deity, and the offering consisted of a raw eggplant. Offer a raw eggplant to my deity every day. That was the thing. So, because he was very advanced, he was just it's an offering. When he sees everything as an offering to the Lord. So then whether it's eggplant or tomato or whatever, doesn't really matter. And even if it's not cooked, doesn't matter, because he's got such devotion to the Lord. Lord accepts it, as he accepted the offering of Vidura. Yeah. Therefore, on the lower level, we do have to follow the rules and regulations. So therefore, our offerings are quite regulated. But in any case, behind this is this principle. We are maintaining ourselves, and we have to show respect to the Lord and gratitude to the Lord for whatever He's supplying us. But on the larger scale, then this has got to do with the whole thing about the population and everything else. And the reason for that is that when we have gratitude to the Lord, it means we also restrict ourselves and we don't waste, we don't just haphazardly take food and waste it or overeat or buy all sorts of unnecessary items. So it's also an attempt to restrict our eating to certain levels. And we see that in many cultures of the world, like the Catholics. They have some restrictions. So previously you couldn't eat meat on Friday. One little restriction. So they eat fish, but they don't eat meat. So a little restriction there. Or with the Jews and the Muslims, okay, you can eat meat, but you can't eat certain meats. You're going to have to be killed in a certain way with the priest there chanting some mantras or whatever. So there's some restriction. Similarly, in the Vedas, we have the Karma Kanda. So they can also offer meat, but under certain rules. So there's some restrictions there. So the whole idea is of these offerings is to restrict us to some degree. And if we do that, then we, let's say, conserve the balance of material nature by restricting ourselves. And thus, the earth tolerates that situation and gives us what we need. But if we waste everything, then earth does not tolerate. And consequently, we're deprived of our food and our water. So the idea of the offering for the devotee has two functions. One is to increase our devotion and provide a means of service, and at the same time provide us a means of supporting our body with no sin involved. But then the other purpose, of course, is by sense control, etc. Then we lessen the burden of the earth, the human burden on the earth, by restricting sinful activities and violent activities. So it is a very, well thought out principle, which is very essential for the human beings, and especially for the devotees, of course, because in this way, the eating also becomes spiritual. We can advance by eating. So that's also an added benefit for us. Okay. Any question there?
You remember in the story of Bhumi and Prithu,
Yeah.
and she didn't want to give food, and he was going to kill her. Said it's your duty as the earth. So it seems a bit of a contradiction. It seems like what's being said, and maybe I misunderstand, if there's no yajna, there's not going to be food.
Yeah.
But Prithu didn't care because he felt it was his duty to feed people, whether they're devotees or not. Apparently they weren't, because she didn't want to feed them. So is Prabhupada saying if there's no yajna, there's going to be starvation because food's going to stop, or what is...
Well, if we go by the Bhagavad Gita, it's considered a chakra or a cycle, a wheel, where the Vedas say make an offering. So the human being makes an offering to the Supreme Lord. The Supreme Lord tells Indra, okay, you got to supply some water. So then he provides the rain. Then the plants grow, and then the human beings take the crops and they eat it. Then they have to go back and take part of that offering and offer to the Lord again. So that's kind of the basic cycle there. In the case of Prithu here, of course, it's a more broader thing because it's not just human beings, it's all sorts of entities, yeah? But for the human being, then, of course, for demons and others, they don't follow anyway, but there is some means by which everybody gets their support on earth. So some arrangement has to be made. But for human beings, then, say intelligent human beings, they will follow the cycle and help. Now, for the lower animals, because they don't get karma or anything, and also they don't lose their senses in most cases, they don't overeat, whatever, they just take what they need and that's it. So they're not a big problem for, causing, imbalance of the earth. It's the human beings, because they got their voracious appetites for everything and their sense gratification, can't control their senses, that we get all this imbalance on the earth. So I think that's the thing with Parikshit Maharaj and the cow and the bull, etc. That human being has to really control himself. Otherwise, we end up with the cow suffering and then doesn't give anything.
So, Raj, you might have a devotee who they're praying to Krishna, for my service, it would be nice to have this facility or that facility. Another devotee is thinking, well, Krishna knows what I need, I don't need to ask for it.
Yeah.
I think it was Pangajangari years ago, he mentioned that Jagannath in Mayapur, he says, Jagannath likes doing deals with devotees. Devotees said, if you give me this, Jagannath, I'll do this for you. So what's like better or higher, just Krishna knows I don't need to ask, or does Krishna enjoy that, sort of reciprocation?
Well, I would think it's just the individual. Of course, we're assuming that it's kind of pure. It's not like contaminated. I'm going to ask for this type of service, and we have some material desire attached to that service, and we're thinking it's pure, fine. But anyway, ultimately, if it is pure, then there are different types of devotees. So some may just be very humble and tolerant, and anything that Krishna does, fine. Others may aspire for a particular service, and they're trying to do that very nicely. So therefore, they keep praying, I want to do this, I want to do that. Even in the spiritual world, we have some devotees that are, tolerant, and they take any service. Others are really pushing for certain types of service there also. So it would depend on the personality of the devotee more than anything. And then Krishna responds to each one. And he doesn't discriminate and say you're worse or you're better or whatever. He's pleased with all their service because they're individuals.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. In the purport today, Prabhupada says, although talking about the demigods, although their standard of life is far more advanced, they're always fully God conscious. So we hear that there's a risk if you go to the higher planets, you become bewildered by opulence and things like that.
Yeah.
I was a bit surprised to read that the demigods are fully God conscious.
Yeah. Well, compared to us, they're in sattva in general, and the demigods themselves are appointed to that position by the Supreme Lord, like Brahma is also. So obviously he's not going to do that for people who aren't devotees. So they're all devotees of sorts. Like that. Yet we do often say, okay, the devatas, it's like karma, Mr. Bhakti, whatever. But compared to the general population on earth, they're much more advanced. And so therefore, in general, the devotional consciousness is more. It is affected by sattva guna because they're still in the material world, as even Brahma is. So they can get affected by the gunas. And even if it's dominantly sattva, and once in a while, Rajaguna or Tamaguna can rise up also, and they can make mistakes also. So they're not infallible, but at the same time, they are devotees appointed by the Lord, so they do have their position, and therefore, Nectar Devosha says one of the angas of bhakti is don't criticize the devatas, because they are servants of the Lord also. Nevertheless, from the point of view of Krishna, rather than just Vishnu, generally they can't really understand Krishna also because he looks so human-like, and they're used to the Vishnu form or the odd reverence form, etc. So also they're a little bit less advanced in that way. So therefore we often put them in a lower category because of that. Nevertheless, we also find in Nectar Devotion later on, when it talks about the rasas, then it mentions in Dasya Rasa, we do have the devatas in Dasya Rasa, so they actually have a rasa with the Lord. But that would also particularly refer to the spiritual world. The devatas also exist in Vaikuntha, and so therefore they're acting as servants in Dasya there. But with the material world also, they do have some sort of, they could reach that level of rasa also.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you for the class. In the verse Akama Savakamava, Mokshakam, is that sort of that lower level below pure bhakti that verse is talking about?
Krishna is very tolerant. So he accepts all types of devotion, as in Bhagavad Gita he says the people that can come with material desires, or with the desire to get wealth, or inquisitiveness, or with knowledge. So he says they're all my devotees. Nevertheless, he says, the one who has knowledge and comes to me is better. One who's got spontaneous love is even better than that. So he accepts all. So therefore, whether you have all desires or no desires, somehow or other you should worship the Lord. So he accepts, but nevertheless, he does have a preference. And of course, if they on a lower level, the hope is that by doing that, they can advance to a higher level also by the association and mercy of devotees. So that's also there. But ultimately, it's only pure bhakti that's going to lead to prema. But everybody gets something. So you get all desires, find your worship of the Lord will give you something. If you want liberation, the Lord will also give you liberation. But when you get that, that's like an obstacle. So the real thing is just give up that and just worship with pure bhakti. Then you get prema.
Maharaj, just questions about collective karma versus individual karma, especially in relation to food. And you cited the example from the Bhagavatam, as we order the root of a tree, all the devas are satisfied. Now, does that work the same way as the little bhakti that we do, especially in the temple, and that we offer and please the Lord? Does that mean all living entities benefit also in the same way? It seems like they're all supplied as well. Supermarkets are full of food. No one's doing jagir out there.
Well, of course, these activities, offering to the Lord is not like karma or collective karma. It's just bhakti, so it's quite different. And it's under the, you can say, the inconceivable Shakti of the Lord, so things don't quite operate in the same way. In the material world, the karmas do have some limitation. Of course, we can have group karma, etc., but only in certain circumstances. And we do have to, we're responsible for our own activities to some degree, so we can't just say, well, he gets the karma, I don't get the karma. So when it comes to offerings, then, yes, you offer to the Supreme Lord and all the devatas are satisfied. That works because Krishna is the sum total of all the devatas. So if he's satisfied, everybody's inside him. They're also satisfied. That's one way of looking at it. And of course, because the devatas are the servants of the Lord, if the master is satisfied, then the servants are also satisfied. So that's as far as that. But the other part is what you're asking about the devotees. If they make an offering, then does that satisfy all the? Yeah. Well, actually, all acts of bhakti that a devotee does are beneficial for everybody, even if they're not aware of it. So they do have some effect, but we can say it's maybe a little bit indirect from our point of view. We don't see the effect, but the presence of any devotee in the world is a blessing for the world. It's all auspicious. So even if he doesn't make an offering, he doesn't do anything, he's there. That's auspicious for the whole world. But then if he chants the holy name, or if he does devotional service, he worships the deity, even then if they don't see it, it's beneficial for the whole world. But of course they do participate. They hear the name or they see the deity, see him worshiping the deity, then that's even more beneficial. So on all levels, it's beneficial. So just the mere presence of a devotee in the material world is auspicious for the whole universe. But if you get to see him, it's better. And if you engage in devotional activities because of him, that's even better. But we see like devotional service is inconceivable because it starts just with accidental bhakti. You just hear the holy name one lifetime, somebody says the name or of the name even accidentally to another person, or because they name their son Narayan or whatever, then it affects the jiva, even if it's accidental. So that's why even Haridas Thakur, when he's chanting, and say, why are you chanting loudly all the time, or whatever? What's the point of that? And then he says, well, because even the plants and animals get benefit because they hear that name. Even plants don't have ears or whatever, but they get the vibration. It's beneficial for them because it's the name of the Lord, and they're getting that effect of it. So they do get some benefit, even animals and plants.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So I have a question in regards to grains, and in those Bhagavad Gita it mentions grains and fruits and vegetables.
Yeah.
So all around the world there's different cultures who have like you say, worship some deity or God himself. And they're doing offerings of those kind of eatables, sometimes, meat as well, but what is, for us to say that this is what Krishna wants to be offered?
Yeah.
Is it just in those categories, and then with those categories then we can use our imagination and prepare all different things, or it's just like, no, it's just this?
Okay. Well, of course, with different devatas, there are different things you offer. So Kali gets the meat and the goats, etc., like that. So that's for her, but then has to be done according to certain, rules and regulations. But for Supreme Lord Vishnu or Krishna, then all that other stuff is not provided by Scripture. So we can't concoct, okay, maybe Krishna likes meat, we don't know. But, we have to go by Scripture. So therefore, there are rules and regulations for what is approved offerings, like in Hari Bhakti Vilasa. What are the approved items? What are the forbidden items? So we have to go by the scriptures as far as Vaishnava is concerned, worshiping Krishna or Vishnu. So by those scriptural rules, we don't concoct our own rules. But as I said, other parts of the Vedas will give other types of food for other, personalities and devatas.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thanks for the class. I had a similar question to Krishna Gan. Someone's asked me before and I didn't know how to answer. There's souls in plants and there's souls in animals, and what the distinguishing feature was, because we only eat plants, we don't eat animals. And I was just wondering what the difference was there, but it sounds like you're explaining it's in the Shastra, so we follow the Shastra.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah. That's one thing, just follow the Shastra. we don't eat the animals, we eat the plants only. Yeah, of course, we could say, well, that's also sin, but here the idea is that by the offering, then the sin of killing the plant is not there. Yeah. The other point is, why doesn't Krishna like animals or whatever for his offering? Kali does, so. The killing the animal is a higher form of life, so the sin is more in doing that than in killing a plant. So you get more sin from killing an animal, and even the animals are graded. And then the cow is considered the highest animal, so therefore if you kill a cow, it's the most sinful of all the meat. Killing and eating is killing the cow is the worst. So there's a whole gradation of sin there, and therefore if you get more bad karma for that. And of course, if you kill a human being, you even get more bad karma for that. So according to the advancement of the species in terms of their, intelligence and whatever, then we get up to the human being, and sin gets more as you go up the ladder from plant to animal to human being. The other point, of course, is the physical effects of also. So you eat the plants, you're less likely to get the diseases than if you eat the animals. So there's problems with it, our physiology and what we can take and whatever, what's healthy for you. Okay, that's it. Okay. Hare Krishna.
Good.